Brazil is not just another country on the map of South America. It is the continent's giant, the largest nation in South America, the fifth largest country in the world by land area, and home to more than 213 million people. Its scale alone changes how we should understand it. Brazil covers roughly half of South America's landmass, touches the Atlantic Ocean with one of the world's longest coastlines, and borders nearly every country on the continent except Ecuador and Chile. That means Brazil is not a regional detail. It is a central force in South American geography, politics, ecology, culture, and economics. To understand Brazil is to understand a country built from extraordinary contrasts, rainforest and megacities, indigenous heritage and Portuguese colonial legacy, vast natural wealth and deep environmental pressure, democratic institutions, and periods of authoritarian rule. The first thing that defines Brazil is space. Its eastern edge faces the Atlantic Ocean, with a coastline stretching about 7,491 kilometers, or 4,655 miles. Inland, Brazil expands across tropical forests, savannas, wetlands, plateaus, low mountains, and enormous river systems. This physical variety helps explain why the country is so diverse economically and culturally. Coastal cities became early centers of settlement and trade, while the interior remained harder to control and develop. The country's modern capital, Brasilia, was deliberately built inland in the 20th century, partly to shift attention away from the coast and toward national integration. Brazil's geography is not passive background scenery. It has shaped where people live, where wealth is concentrated, how transportation works, and why managing such a large federation remains a constant political challenge. Brazil is also the country of the Amazon, and that fact gives it global importance. Most of the Amazon basin lies within Brazil, including the world's largest river system and the most extensive virgin tropical forest on Earth. The Amazon is not just a forest filled with trees. It is a climate system, a water system, a habitat network, and a living archive of biodiversity. It influences rainfall patterns, stores enormous amounts of carbon, and supports countless species, many of which are found nowhere else. Brazil is ranked first among the world's megadiverse countries, meaning its ecological wealth is among the richest on the planet. But that also places Brazil under intense global attention, because deforestation and environmental degradation inside its borders can affect climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecological stability far beyond Brazil itself. Long before Brazil became Brazil, the land was inhabited by many indigenous peoples with different languages, cultures, territories, and ways of life. Their history did not begin with European arrival, but European arrival radically changed it. In 1500, the Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral landed on the coast, and Portugal claimed the territory. Over time, the Portuguese established settlements, including São Vicente in 1532, often described as the first permanent Portuguese settlement in Brazil. Colonization brought plantation agriculture, extraction, forced labor, disease, displacement, and violence. Enslaved Africans were imported in huge numbers to work on plantations, deeply shaping Brazil's population, culture, religion, food, music, and social structure. Brazil's identity today cannot be understood without recognizing this layered history of indigenous presence, European colonization, and African forced migration. One of Brazil's most distinctive features is language. It is the only Portuguese-speaking country in the Americas and has the largest Portuguese-speaking population in the world. This separates Brazil culturally from most of its Spanish-speaking neighbors, even though it shares the same continent and many regional challenges. Language helped tie Brazil to Portugal during the colonial period and still connects it to the wider Lusophone world, including countries in Africa and Europe. But Brazilian Portuguese also developed its own rhythms, expressions, accents, and cultural references. Language became a unifying force across a very large territory, helping bind together regions that are geographically distant and socially different. In Brazil, Portuguese is more than an administrative tool. It is part of how a continental-sized country imagines itself as one nation. Brazil's path to independence was unusual compared with many other countries in the Americas. In 1815, Brazil was elevated from colony to part of a united kingdom with Portugal, after the Portuguese royal court had moved to Rio de Janeiro during the Napoleonic era. This gave Brazil a different status inside the Portuguese world. Then, in 1822, Prince Pedro of Braganza declared Brazilian independence. After conflict with Portugal, he became the ruler of the Empire of Brazil. Instead of immediately becoming a republic, Brazil became a monarchy. Its 1824 constitution created a bicameral legislature and included principles such as freedom of religion and freedom of the press. Yet this political modernization existed alongside the brutal reality of slavery, which remained central to Brazil's economy and society for decades after independence. Slavery is one of the central facts in Brazilian history. Brazil imported enslaved Africans on a massive scale, and slavery shaped plantation agriculture, social hierarchy, wealth accumulation, and racial inequality. Although the empire introduced gradual abolition measures over time, slavery was not fully abolished until 1888, making Brazil the last country in the Americas to end it. The following year, in 1889, the monarchy fell after a military coup, and Brazil became a presidential republic. This sequence matters. Abolition and republicanism arrived almost together, but neither instantly solved the social damage left by slavery. Many formerly enslaved people gained legal freedom without equal access to land, education, protection, or political power. The legacy of that system continued to influence inequality, urban life, regional development, and debates over race and citizenship. Brazil's republican history has been marked by cycles of democracy, authoritarian rule, reform, and crisis. In 1930, an armed revolution ended the First Republic and brought Getulio Vargas to power. Vargas later carried out a self-coup in 1937, creating the authoritarian Estado Novo. Under his rule, Brazil centralized power, pursued modernization, and took part in World War II. Democracy returned after Vargas was removed in 1945, but it did not remain uninterrupted. In 1964, a military dictatorship came to power with support from the United States and ruled until 1985. The return to civilian government eventually led to the 1988 Constitution, which defines Brazil as a democratic federal republic. This history helps explain why modern Brazil places such importance on constitutional order, elections, federalism, and civilian institutions. Modern Brazil is a federation made up of 26 states and a federal district, where Brasília is located. Federalism matters because Brazil is too large and diverse to govern as if every region had the same needs. São Paulo, the most populous city, is an economic powerhouse. Rio de Janeiro carries deep cultural and historical significance. Brasília symbolizes national planning and political authority. Other regions have their own identities, industries, environmental realities, and social challenges. The structure of a federal republic allows states to hold power while still remaining part of a national framework. But it also creates coordination problems. Policies on infrastructure, policing, environment, healthcare, taxation, and education must operate across a country whose regions can feel almost like different worlds. Economically, Brazil is one of the most important countries in the global south. It is an emerging, upper-middle-income economy, a newly industrialized country, and one of the 10 largest economies in the world by both nominal GDP and purchasing power parity. It is the largest economy in Latin America and the Southern Hemisphere, and it holds the largest share of wealth in South America. Brazil exports major agricultural goods, mineral resources, and manufactured products. Its economy is complex because it is not based on one sector alone. Agriculture, mining, energy, manufacturing, finance, and services all matter. This diversity gives Brazil resilience, but it also creates tensions: development versus conservation, export growth versus inequality, industrial ambition versus infrastructure limits, and global opportunity versus domestic political instability. Brazil's global role has grown because its size, population, resources, and diplomatic reach make it impossible to ignore. It is a founding member of the United Nations and belongs to groups such as the G20, BRICS, Mercosur, the Organization of American States, the Organization of Ibero-American States, and the Community of Portuguese-language countries. It is also an observer state of the Arab League and a major non-NATO ally of the United States. These memberships show Brazil's unusual position. It connects Latin America, the Portuguese-speaking world, emerging economies, global agriculture, climate diplomacy, and South-South cooperation. Brazil is often described as a regional power and a rising global power, but its influence depends on how effectively it can turn its natural and demographic weight into stable leadership. The central story of Brazil is the story of scale meeting complexity. It is a country large enough to shape climate debates, food markets, regional politics, biodiversity protection, and global diplomacy. It contains some of the planet's most important ecosystems, some of Latin America's largest cities, and one of the world's biggest economies. But it also carries the weight of colonial extraction, slavery, inequality, environmental pressure, and repeated political upheaval. Brazil's importance does not come from a single fact. It comes from the way geography, history, culture, economics, and ecology overlap inside one enormous country. That is why Brazil matters far beyond its borders. What happens there affects South America, the Atlantic world, the global environment, and the future balance of power among emerging nations. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.